On to the University of Wisconsin campus at Madison today. Administrative offices at City College in New York for 5 hours
at
today.
Cornell University, President James Perkins declared an emergency.
Heard at San Francisco State College today verges on civil insurrection.
We are trying to alter the destiny of higher education in this country. And I feel it's about time that the power structure in this country come to grips with the changing order of the time.
We saw ourselves at an early stage more and more as part of our struggle as an international struggle.
I remember calling my mother and she said, "Jackie, I know you're not in that building."
I believe that this is a kind of Vietnam, and this is why I am dedicated to the idea that whatever it takes, there will be no retreat.
It wasn't just civil discord, but a new sense of people seeking to be actors in their own lives, real agents of change.
Wow, that's powerful. Okay, that was a clip or the trailer of the new documentary, Agents of Change. And
Absolutely.
As the old adage goes, be the change you hope to see in the world. Well, that's exactly what this new award-winning documentary does.
Absolutely. Now, it gives us a rare look inside racial conditions on college campuses across the United States and shows how students can incite change. Filmmakers Frank Dawson and Abby Ginzberg, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, that was a powerful trailer. Just that alone makes me want to rush out and see the film. But tell us a little bit more about it and why you all decided to work on this project.
I'll start. Okay, so Frank and I were both students at Cornell back in the late 60s, which is now many years ago. And it was a pivotal time both in American history and in the history of Cornell's campus. Black students were really, there was no inclusion. They were just sort of brought to this all-white campus in rural upstate New York and said, you know, adjust, assimilate, make it work. And they had a few demands. Take it away.
Well, Abby and I were both at Cornell at the time. It was my freshman year, Abby's sophomore year, but we did not know one another.
Wow.
We were introduced years later by a mutual friend who was also at Cornell and knew that we both wanted to tell this story. And so it was a 7-year journey it took us to complete this film.
Wow.
And for both of us, it was a defining moment in our lives as far as what we did as students and how relevant it is in terms of what students are going through today. So the timeliness of this film just cannot be denied.
Absolutely.
And we felt like it was a hidden part of American history. So somebody in the film, they don't actually say it in the film, but it was, the comment was, we've been written out of history.
Wow.
And so the idea from our end was to write it back into history. And so this is, this is really an important story for people to know. Students on today's college campuses have no idea how Black or ethnic studies came to be. And we are sort of telling it in the first person stories of the people who made it happen, both in San Francisco State and at Cornell.
Right.
What are the two pivotal processes that you chose to highlight in this movie, or in this documentary?
San Francisco State in 1968 was the longest student strike in the history of American universities. Danny Glover was an 18-year-old student at San Francisco State at that time, and he's in the film. And you know, one of the takeaways from the film also is, like coaches used to tell me in athletics, is the way you practice is the way you play. So the things that you do as a young person on a college campus, which is pretty much a protected environment, but being able to be involved in identifying things that need to be changed, that is an excellent time for you to practice that and get into that, and you find that it's something that you continue to do for the rest of your life. One of the wonderful things about the film, all the people that we interviewed for this and everything, is what they've continued to do since that time in terms of being agents of change and dedicating their lives in terms of, if you see something wrong, you got to do something about it.
And at that protest, what were they protesting for?
Well, again, Cornell, for example, at you know, there was a lack of ethnic students, Black students in particular, at that college at that time. The president who had come in 1963 was appalled by the lack of diversity, decided to do something about it. And the year that my class came in was the first time that Cornell had aggressively pursued students from the inner city. And so I grew up in a public housing project on the Lower East Side of New York City, and so did many of my classmates from similar situations around the country. And we were a different kind of student. We were qualified, but we didn't take no mess. You know? So
a little bit of street savvy.
So the idea of identifying something, being better kind of educated in terms of what the issues were by the upperclassmen, but we all came together to accomplish something that we all believed in and something that was more important than us as individuals.
So it was about racial equality and inclusion?
Yeah, and inclusion. So, for example, there had been some disciplinary actions taken against some black students, and there were no black students on the judicial, disciplinary committee. That was one incident. There was, this demand for black studies that had been happening and had not quite yet been realized. And there were any number of other protests taking place, at least at Cornell, during that whole time. So white students, as well as black students, were engaged in protesting what we thought were the injustices on the college campus. And when the black students took over a student union building after a cross had been burned on the black women's dormitory, the white students were essentially called and said, you need to come do a kind of safety perimeter, walk around as a safety perimeter around the building to try to protect the students on the inside. I mean, it was a joke that we really could do that. We didn't do a very good job of it, but we were all there in the freezing rain at 6 o'clock in the morning.
After we were attacked by a white fraternity and made the decision to arm ourselves for our own protection. And that's what made it a national story on the covers of Time and Life and Newsweek magazine, and that's one of the reasons that this story still resonates today.
That is powerful stuff. It seems like there are almost daily protests going on in the United States currently. What sort of lessons do you think people can take away from watching this documentary and applying it to incite change themselves?
Well, this great idea of a democracy in our nation is not a given, and unless the people aggressively protect that democracy by speaking out and coming together. This whole idea of dividing us, which is what's happening exactly right now, we're going to get nowhere. One of the things I love about both the San Francisco State and the Cornell University situation was that we had disparate groups come together to support it. Nothing would have changed at that university if not of the support of the white students, if the African American and Latino students had not banded together. And so the same thing at San Francisco State. It was a collective. A lot of people, like-minded people, came together, and that is what affected change. And that's exactly what needs to happen in our country today.
And students today, I have to say, are not quite as clear about how do you build those alliances. So, everybody's kind of off in their own little silo, and part of what we're trying to kind of stimulate is a conversation with many of the students who are on college campuses today about how do you find allies. There are a lot of people that don't want to be in buildings that have slaveholders' names on them, but you've got to reach out, you've got to kind of build the movement, around that, or the university will never budge. And they may not budge anyway, but you can almost guarantee it that if it's 4 students screaming about something, it's not enough.
Of course.
Well, how do you all feel about the current state of race relations in our country now?
Well,
especially on some of the campuses.
Well, one of the things that, if you could look for a silver lining in having 45 as the president, that a number of things that have boiled beneath the surface, have come to the surface.
Absolutely.
So again, our belief that because we've had an African American president, we're in post-racial America, that cannot be thought of anymore. Really, in terms of the things that have come to the surface, it's a real challenge, I think, for students on campuses today. I mean, the first thing we tell them is, do not pick up a gun. Tactics have to be different today. We're in a different time today. But at the same time, they have to recognize the power that we have as a people. Once again, if and when we come together to change things that we know are wrong for the majority of the people.
And so, when racist incidents happen, there are, signs that get put up, anti-Muslim stuff that goes out. Part of what we think sort of the message of our film and of our experience is, again, you've got to mobilize across the campus. You can't just have Muslims upset that there was an anti-Muslim phrase put out on, that happened at the University of Michigan, or that there's a noose representing something at American University. Students at these places have to respond as a group to say, and the administrators and the faculty all have to say, this is unacceptable on our college campus. And, we see it happen. Sometimes it's a little bit slow, but I'm optimistic that there will be sort of an appropriate response. But students, part of our thing is students need to feel their own power. And part of what happened in the late 1960s is that students became more involved in the governance of the university. So part of the demands were, you've got to let in more black students. You can't just have like 25 a year and think that you're diversifying this campus. So, as those demands kind of made their way up the chain and more things were done around changing admissions policies, that's improved life on these campuses. So, but I think part of what we're saying here is much of this came out of struggle, and we want people to know that history. It didn't just happen because some white administrators decided to change things.
And these weren't isolated incidents. The other thing is that this was a movement in the late 1960s.
I remember Kent State University, where I went to school, they had the shooting of the kids that were there, and they had the protests that they were going through at that time as well.
Yes, more than 1,000 college campuses across the country, which our film was able to deal with. You know, not just San Francisco State on the West Coast and Cornell on the East Coast, but it was all in between as well.
Wow. Well, we want to talk more about Agents of Change. We're going to take a quick break, and then we'll come right back with more, okay?
Certainly.
All right, stick right there, and don't go away. We'll be right back.
Powerful stuff.
Yeah.
It's powerful.
Welcome back to Arise 360. We're still here chatting with filmmakers Frank and Abby for the film Agents of Change.
Absolutely. Now, I need to ask the question, do you think that we'll ever live in an environment or a society where racially charged protests won't be needed?
Whew. That's a good one.
Hopeful. You know, I'm an optimist, but it's critical that every ensuing generation take on that mantle in order to move it forward. It's almost like we can never rest. We had a phrase back at that time, "A luta continua," the struggle continues, and every generation has to understand that they have to be a part of that continuing struggle.
Do you think that this generation is doing anything to further the
Well,
actions?
I'm optimistic so I'm optimistic as of 3 days ago when the students in Parkland, in Miami, etc., started to react, and they're like now calling for a 1 million student march on Washington. So that is the kind of real response we've needed to see to gun safety, and we haven't had it. So I'm like getting more optimistic that maybe we'll see some change on gun control. I think that there are little pockets of resistance, and we're just going to have to. I'm with Frank that we're optimists, but we're also old optimists, and so we really.
Speak for yourself.
All right, he's a young optimist. I'm an old optimist. But we really part of I think why we feel like this is so important right now is that you want to kind of inspire the next generation to find, as I say, the allies that can really make a difference as they move forward.
Well, I know watching the documentary and clips that I've seen, it's very inspiring to see a lot of the historical footage and a lot of the, just name drop of some of the people that you had in this film that were featured, like, Martin Luther King and other people like that.
Well, we also have Danny Glover. Many people do not know that Danny Glover cut his teeth as a young student at San Francisco State. And what Danny says, Danny gives us sort of his experience during his time at State, but at the end what he says is, my entire life as an actor and an activist has been guided by what I learned at San Francisco State. So from the time he was, in his late teens till today, where he is one of the most progressive and sort of important voices in Hollywood, it was formed. It was, he was imprinted by what he went through at San Francisco State, and so were all the other people in our film.
What would you say one of the most shocking things you learnt while working on Agents of Change has been?
Shocking thing. That's I don't know that I learned anything shocking since we were a part of this. And so.
But did it bring back memories?
Oh, without a doubt.
Oh yeah.
I mean, going around the country and interviewing folks that you haven't seen in such a long time, and kind of reliving those moments. I'm not into film, but Abby insisted I get interviewed, and, but we didn't want to kind of like cross that line of being a producer and being in the film as well. But during that interview, I mean, I understood what it was to other people that I interviewed for the film because I became very emotional going back to that time.
As if it was yesterday.
Yeah.
That's the amazing thing for both the students at San Francisco State and the folks at Cornell. Recounting what it was like to be there at that moment, it was as if it was yesterday. It was more than 40 years after the fact. So that's how key and formative, those connections were for people.
So we didn't have social media. There were many more personal connections to one another. So it was really a different time. And again, reliving kind of that as far as the interview really takes you back to that when we really, kind of related to one another on a really human level down here on the ground.
So for those of us that want to live this experience for the first time, where can we catch the documentary?
So it's going to be on the World Channel, which is part of the PBS larger network. So, but basically it depends on your zip code. So you have to go to www.worldchannel.org. It broadcasts tomorrow night pretty pretty much 5 o'clock East Coast, 5 o'clock West Coast, 8 o'clock East Coast time.
Okay.
But it's on at different times. So you go to the World Channel, you put in your zip code, you figure out who your broadcast provider is, and then it tells you when to watch it.
And it'll be streaming after that as well.
It'll be streaming off of the World Channel right after that, starting on February 21st.
Right. You can also go to our website, www.agentsofchange.com, and you'll find out film.com, and you'll find information in terms of how to access that link to enter your zip code in as well.
Well, it's definitely a must-see documentary. So thank you so much, both of you, for all the work you've done on this.
Well, thank you for having us.
All right.
Really inspirational stuff. Thank you.
All right, take care. And Arise 360 will be right back with much more. You guys are great. Good job.